welcome to the Rotary Club of Kerrville. This is the longest I've heard that bell. Shocking. I want to welcome each of you here. Excited to all be back together today, and I want you to notice that we have a lot of our friends with us via Zoom as well. I'd like to remind you to mute your cell phone if you're on Zoom, mute your computer, so that maybe we can figure out how we can do this together. I also would like to invite Dr. Williams to give us our invocation.
Let us pray. Father, we thank you for this day, though it's a very unsettling day, as we don't know really yet who is the next president, and we may not know for days, and then there are going to be legal challenges, both sides say. So it is a very unsettling time, but help us in the midst of that to remember that Jesus is still on the throne. We thank you for the blessing of being able to live in the best and prettiest part of the best state ever. And we thank you for the new Texas Center that has started at Schreiner University, and for our guest speaker today to tell us an interesting piece of our Hill Country history. We thank you that we are back together again. We thank you for this food. In Jesus' name, amen.
Okay, if you'll join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic that stands one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, guys, I'm thinking Christy is visiting with the Written House, who's taking care of our Zoom people, so we have some issues there. We'll know that it sounds like it's going well. We are going to have a presentation today from Dr. Don Frazier of Schreiner University, Texas Center at Schreiner University. Overview of the center a while back, and everybody was so excited. Now we're going to give you a specific story of the Hill Country.
The audio isn't working.
Battle in the Civil War, but I can't pronounce the name. So we will let him do that, and I would like to invite Marta Dibbin.
David, fix the sound, please.
Tammy, your audio is not good. I think it's Tammy. Tammy's not standing close enough to the mic because it sounded.
No, it's all broken up.
Yeah, it was fine during the invocation.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see those of you that are on Zoom, and for those of you that are at the Kroc Center. One of these days, we shall too see you face to face. Hope you guys enjoyed today. Many of you have already heard Dr. Frazier speak, but I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of background on him as well. Graduated from University of Texas Washington and University. He is the award-winning author of several books relative to Texas and the Civil War and the role that Texas played in the Civil War. He has been involved in Texas historical work and museum work, has been part of the Texas Civil War Museum, the Buffalo Gap Historic Village in Frontier, Texas. He is a fellow of the Texas State Historical Association and is a director scholar on the board of the Texas Historical Foundation. He helped found the McWhinney Group, which is a Texas-based nonprofit that is in the educational adventure enterprise and travel and things like that. So we're delighted at Schreiner to have Dr. Frazier. He has hit the ground running and has put some really incredible things in place relative to the actual physical building of the center. And he's got some great people that have signed on to help him support what he's doing at the center. And I hope you guys enjoyed today. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Don Frazier.
All right, we're going to do a mic check for starters. I'm hoping everybody at home can hear. Thumbs up if you can. All right, and hopefully y'all can hear me at the Kroc Center as well. This is a new venture for me. I'm a Civil War historian, few decades experience, but this is my first time to wander into Hill Country Civil War history, and I had no idea that the Hill Country was kind of ground zero for the Civil War in Texas. And so this is essentially what I mean by that. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully all that will work. And if people see the PowerPoint, just give me a thumbs up so that we know that we're doing it right. All right. So the topic today is the Treue der Union monument in Comfort, but also kind of how it got to be there, why there's this monument in Comfort, and some of the background behind it. It's essentially a story of immigrants that are coming to the United States trying to flee issues in their own country, only to find issues in their new country. So first of all, let's talk about the mood in Europe. 1848 in Europe is chaotic. There's a lot of people that are thinking about reshaping Europe in a new way, to get away from the old patterns of monarchy and oligarchy and all those sorts of strong one-person ruling systems, and to try to extend the voice of the people into government. Now, one of the people that's working on this is a guy named Karl Marx, and he is writing pamphlets that are heavily distributed through Europe, in particular the Communist Manifesto. Now, we tend to have a sort of visceral reaction to the term communist, and that is a product of the Cold War. In 1848, it was a brand new idea, this idea of communism, where you would actually have a greater equity stake in society if you're in the working class. But not everybody's going for it. I mean, there's a lot of people saying, you know, this is a great way to deprive me of my personal resources. This is a great way for people that own stuff to have to give up the stuff they own so it can be redistributed to the masses. And so it's been called everything from, you know, misguided to a hobgoblin stalking Europe. But that is one of the things that is afoot in Europe. There's other issues that are leading to political agitation, but Communist Manifesto is right there in the mix. Here's our friend Karl Marx. So he's coming up with this idea that is a purely academic idea. He has other writers thrown in with him. But overall, this sort of mood of we want to do things differently than we've done in the past lends itself to a label of these dissenters are the 48ers, the people that are rising up and agitating in 1848. What ends up happening is these idealistic 48ers begin to practice street violence. And they shatter a lot of windows, they loot a lot of stores, and they build barricades and dare the government to intervene. Now, this is a scene from Berlin. This is the German 48ers rebelling, but it's really Europe-wide. I mean, you can take a look at this map. Clearly, you won't be able to read the detail, but anywhere there's a capital in Europe or a major college town, there is this sort of unrest, this sort of street violence, this taking to the barricades. And this is what it looks like in the popular imagination. You can see some of these images, you know, it's happening in France. There was a similar episode in Paris in 1830, which inspired Victor Hugo to write a book called Les Miserables, which many people have seen as a stage play. But it's the same idea. And Victor Hugo is actually one of the 48ers as well. It's thinking people that are a little concerned about the disenfranchisement of the masses. And they start taking matters into their own hands. But France, Poland, that's I'm glad that's a smaller of the images because they're busy cutting people's heads off. The Poles took it to some great extremes. But you can also see this image of Italy over here in 1848. And there's a guy named Giuseppe Garibaldi that is heavily involved in that and will later on become one of the unifiers of Italy. So this is a revolutionary generation that's rising up in Europe. But like so much political agitation, it doesn't always go the way of the agitators. And so they have a couple of options. they can either wait to be hunted down by the government authorities, or they can get the heck out of there. And so between 1840 and 1860, there is a major spike in European immigration to the United States. Some of this is the famine Irish. They're not in the same category. They're still coming over. But by 1860, 1 out of 10 of Americans is foreign born. So that's a pretty sizable bunch. So this is an immigration story as much as anything else. And like any immigration story, there is kind of a sinister side to it. The cartoon you're seeing in the background shows the popular impression of all these new Irish and German immigrants. And if you'll notice, what they're carrying between them is a ballot box. I had no idea that this was going to be such a timely lecture. And so these guys that drew this cartoon, the editorial cartoon you're looking at, essentially says, you know, between the Irish in their whiskey barrels and the Germans in their beer barrels, they'll be able to sway American elections. And there's actually the rise of an American nativist group called the Wide Awakes. The rather good-looking fellow on the left of your screen, I guess it's the left of your screen, that is referred to as Uncle Sam's youngest son, and his name is Citizen. And he is looking askance at all this sort of change in American society, and he's not crazy about it. And so these American nativists are taking political action in their own right to try to limit immigration and also to limit the impact that these immigrants might have. So, you know, you're jumping right out of the frying pan and into the fire in a lot of ways if you're immigrating from Germany in this time period. But my gosh, if you're going to jump into a fire, let's jump into the far edge of it, and maybe you won't get burned as badly. And the far edge of the United States is essentially, well, Kerrville. It's 173. So I guess, you know, Bandera would be in there too. But essentially, we're on the edge of civilization in the 1850s. And a bunch of these Germans that find themselves no longer at home, drift into Texas, as well as other places. You have a very large German population in Cincinnati, for instance, in St. Louis, for instance. There's so many German immigrants coming in that during the American Civil War, for instance, there's an entire Army Corps composed of nothing but Germans. So we're talking about a very sizable population, and Texas gets its share. And these guys move out to places like Comal County. They move over into Austin County. They move into Blanco County, Gillespie, and certainly Kerr County. And then when Kendall County is formed in 1862, that incorporates a bunch as well. So here's who else is in the mix. Free thinkers. And free thinkers are composed of a bunch of philosophically bent folks that are really thinking about what life would look like in a kind of new society that doesn't have an emphasis on state religion, for instance. So one of the things that attracted free thinkers to the United States was this idea of a separation of church and state. So freedom from religion is a big idea that is in currency with the free thinkers in Europe. And they bring that with them to the American shores. But some people not only want to be not bothered by an organized religion, they would like to not be bothered by religion at all. So if you're a 19th century agnostic or an atheist or maybe a secular humanist, or if you just don't like priests, you might find common cause with free thinkers. In this mix, there are also people that refer to themselves as Latiners. And it's a strange sort of turn of phrase, but that's about the best translation. And a Latiner is somebody from a college town where they would talk about big ideas in sort of public forums in Latin. And so if you were an educated European hanging out in a college town, you were probably fluent in Latin. And it's these, what Lyndon Baines Johnson would have referred to as pointy head academics that also joined this exodus out of Europe and into the United States. And you can see how being an academic and someone who likes to deal in philosophy and theory might also be interested in free thinking ideology and also even this new concept of communism. But here's how it plays in the United States and certainly in Texas. And that is, you ain't from around here, are you? And so these guys are aliens in an alien land. Now, I put the picture of the pansy up there because by the late 19th century, this freethinker movement has adopted the flower, the pansy, as its symbol. So if you go to area cemeteries and you see pansies on that tombstone, they may have in fact been a free thinker. So a little bit of cemetery lore for you. Well, these people came to Texas to get away from the troubles of Europe, and they formed these communities where they can once again have their conversations around the campfire in Latin. They can think lofty thoughts. They can raise up their children kind of in a kept environment where they can help their children see the world in the way that they want them to see it. And that makes the Texas Hill Country kind of an ideal incubator. If you want to get away from all that and live kind of a semi-utopian lifestyle where you can live in your head and also have a very nice setting, who wouldn't want to live down here along the banks of the Guadalupe? But the problem is trouble finds them anyway. You know, the spirit that is animating the revolutions in Europe knows no boundaries, and it certainly is capable of crossing oceans. And when the United States begins to have its own sectional difficulties, there are people that refer to the crisis in terms of socialist or communist language, surprisingly. So it's not just a war to abolish slavery, it's a war of labor versus capital. And this isn't Germans saying this, this is people from New York. So a lot of times we think about the American Civil War as a pretty cut and dry, you know, well, it's war to free the slaves, slavery caused the Civil War, it's very monocausational. There are also other world ideologies, world currents that are busy circulating that also inform this conflict. And so when this conflict breaks, a bunch of these German free thinkers, a bunch of these immigrants who have been exposed to this conversation before, all of a sudden say, uh-oh, not here, not again. You know, we're not having to do this all over again, are we? And the short answer is, yeah, I'm afraid you are. Trouble finds them out. Now, this image you're looking at here is actually Texas state troops as they are seizing control of the Alamo and taking over federal assets in San Antonio. So here is a map that shows the secession vote in 1861. When Texas chooses to secede from the United States, they do it a little differently in that they call a statewide referendum. They want to know county by county. They want to canvass the people of Texas to see if they're actually into this or not. You know, is secession the legitimate voice of the people? And so they go county by county, and here's how it shakes out. The brown counties on your map are against secession. They do not want to leave the Union. So I've put that "you are here" arrow to point right to the Kroc Center and actually to your living rooms, because that is kind of what we're talking about. So take a look at how this map lays out. You see brown to the south, brown to the north, brown to the east, and light brown, which is Indian Territory, to the west. Kerr County, Bandera County are essentially the creamy middle of a anti-secession sandwich. And the vote in both those counties is also pretty doggone close. So that is starting to set the stage for some sectarian agitation. We'll leave it at that for the time being. The people that want to stay in the Union aren't crazy about the secessionists. The secessionists are a little wary of their neighbors that want to stay in the Union. So it's starting to shape up like a showdown. All right. The people in the Hill Country, in particular, Gillespie, Blanco/Kendall County, and Kerr County, that are against secession and certainly against the formation of a completely new country, organize themselves into an armed militia. And they call themselves the Hill Country Militia. And when locals say, well, what are you guys militiaing about exactly? What are you organizing about? They're saying, well, we're just here to, chase off cattle rustlers, and we're here to, guard against Indians and things like that. But one thing's for sure, these guys are well armed and they're well organized and they're fairly well trained. Some of the people that came over during that big wave of immigration had military experience, or they certainly knew how to read a drill book. And all of a sudden, these guys are taking on the dimensions of a paramilitary organization in the Hill Country. Well, it'd be one thing if they kept it purely on the defensive, because hey, the Hill Country is still fairly remote and it's a long way from some of the other scenes of action. But a subset of this bunch, made up of more active members, calling themselves the Lukenbach Bushwhackers, take to raiding neighbors' farms, essentially agitating on behalf of the Union against local secessionists. So in places like Kerr County, where the sentiment is very heavily divided, this is pretty unwelcome activity. And all of a sudden news starts filtering out through the rest of Texas. The Hill Country's kind of got a lot of Unionists and they're stealing our chickens. And we would like somebody to come do something about it. Now, before we think of this in purely ethnic terms, one of the companies, the Kerr County company, was referred to as the American Company. And so as you think about the American Civil War, you need to think in terms of, not everybody was pro-Confederate. There was these sort of never Confederate people that were still in the mix and finding themselves in a fairly precarious situation. And that is certainly the case in Kerr County. Well, here's what brings everything to a head. The Confederates pass nearly universal conscription. So if you're between the ages of 17 and 38, 17 and 40, we'll round up, you have to join the Confederate Army unless you're from a exempt group. These exempt groups included people that ran mills, either grist mills, lumber mills, something that was of a public necessity. If you had more than 20 slaves, you were exempted from conscription. But if you were a sort of middling farmer that was trying to get a farm up and running in the Hill Country, all of a sudden you had a target on your back. You had to join. And it didn't matter how you felt about that referendum in 1861, you're going to have to join the Confederate Army. Here's what starts making the Confederate semi-crazy about enforcing conscription. New Orleans, Louisiana falls. New Orleans is the largest city in the Confederacy, and it's also their center of banking. But in terms of Texas, it shows that the federal forces are coming because the next jump from New Orleans is Galveston or Indianola. And so Texans are bracing for a federal invasion. And in fact, that invasion comes in October with the fall of Galveston. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. With the fall of New Orleans, the question is, how do we bring the federal authority here? How can we make all this happen? All right, so that's the conversation going on in the Hill Country militia circles. What's going on in Austin with the Confederate government in Texas is, how do we suppress all these Unionists that we were already getting complaints about? And the military commander of Texas, a guy named Paul O. Hebert, issues martial law. says, guess what? Federal authority or state authority, civil authority no longer exist in Texas. It is now all military authority. And they actually send provost marshals to Fredericksburg, to the small village of Kerrville, and these guys make sure that what they say goes. They're kind of one person rule. They also impose a tax in kind, and they're rounding up all those assets. 1/10 of your crop is now forfeit to the Confederacy, and they're also there to round up conscripts, like this image shows. When that occurs, it forces people's hands. So the Hill Country Militia was kind of a passive militia. Luckenbach bushwhackers were troublemakers, sure, but the Hill Country Militia at this point had not really moved in an overtly aggressive way. But now that the provost marshals are showing up in Fredericksburg, in Kerrville, as Confederate troops move into their encampment is actually between Harper and Fredericksburg. There is a Confederate presence that the Hill Country Militia can't really ignore. And sooner or later, everybody's anticipating a knock on their door from the Confederate authorities. Well, Confederate provost marshals held this important power that no one could travel without a pass issued from them. So step one, you had to go into the provost marshal and say, hey, I would like to travel from point A to point B. I've got some lumber I need to haul from my mill down to Comfort, for instance. And the provost marshal would say, fine, all you have to do is take an oath of allegiance to the Confederacy. Well, if you're one of these guys that were just not a supporter of the Confederacy, that's a problem. Meanwhile, Hill Country Militia guys are saying, look, maybe we should throw a full-on rebellion here, throw these provost marshals out, and maybe we can get some manpower by going down to Camp Verde, where there is a sizable, say a couple of hundred Union prisoners being held at a place called Prisoner Canyon, which is actually just across Verde Creek from Camp Verde. I mean, this was a real plot that they started thinking about. Maybe we can go round those guys up and get them armed, and that'll give us numbers that we need. So much so that the Confederates moved those prisoners up to Fort Mason, up in Mason, Texas. Later on, they'll move them down to San Antonio. But the Hill Country Militia says, if we can free these guys, and if we can't throw a full-blown rebellion, maybe we will have enough strength to move from the Hill Country into Mexico, down along the Rio Grande to Matamoros, and then from Matamoros, we could head over to New Orleans and join the Federal Army and help liberate Texas. And that's one of the reasons that the federal authorities actually invade Galveston, is they're reinserting Texas Unionists into the state, but that's in October. So this is all going down in July. So this is a little ahead of that capture of Galveston. Well, the Hill Country Militia gets made. Essentially, they get ratted out by a new Scottish immigrant in the neighborhood, a guy named Basil Stewart. And once they figure out that Basil is telling the Confederate authorities all of their movements and all their plans, the Hill Country Militia and each of their companies come together, they have a meeting, and they draw lots for which one of them is going to go kill Basil Stewart. And so Ernst Bessler from Comfort draws the short straw, and he and Basil are out in the field one day, and Bessler kills him. Well, now that their informant is dead, the Confederate authorities in the area go, okay, these guys must be up to no good because of all the stuff Basil told us, and now he turns up dead. This isn't good. So they start scouring the neighborhood, and they start rounding up people that can't really account for their whereabouts, and they start hanging them. And they hang them on the banks of Goat Creek, and they hang them on up near Harper, and they start decorating the trees of the Hill Country with some of these Unionists. Well, the Hill Country Militia now has some hard choices. They can either stay there and take it, or they can try to get to Mexico. And fathers of sons that are in their 20s are telling their boys, if you stick around here, you're either going to get hanged or you're going to be forced into the Confederate Army. You're young. Why don't you see if you can use your strength and energy to get to Mexico? And so about 60 of them gather up on Upper Turtle Creek Road west of Kerrville. And they say, all right, this is our time. We're going to head out. So on the 3rd of August, and everybody knows what weather's like in the hill country on the 3rd of August. It's hot. It's droughty during that time period. Water's not particularly predictable. These guys all mount up and they start heading that direction. But they make a mistake. There's a German teamster with a pass from the provost marshal that says he can be moving around that gets in their way, and they plunder his wagon. They essentially steal all of his stuff. So he goes and rats them out, tells the Confederate authorities, guess what? They're on the run, and y'all need to go get them. And the chase is on. So Lieutenant C.D. McRae is in charge of the Texas troops around Fredericksburg, and he is chasing the 60 refugee Germans heading towards Mexico, who are led by Fritz Tegener, who is actually Tegener Creek is named after him. He ran a mill up near Hunt, between Ingram and Hunt. And after about a week's long pursuit, they find the Germans, the German Unionists, resting on the banks of the Nueces River, where there's reliable water. Their horses are all beat up from having to cross the hill country. So they're taking kind of a slow pace. They're resting. Next day, they'll head off into Mexico, but the Confederates get there first. They attack the Confederates, and the Confederates actually repel the attack a number of times, but after a while, the Germans decide, we can't hold this, and a bunch of them flee, leaving behind others who are determined to die in place at their barricade, just like their forebears had done in Europe back in 1848. And they get their wish. There are 19 dead Unionists. No wounded prisoners were taken. Primarily, these guys are so shot up, they were probably beyond hope anyway. But that doesn't end the violence. This cluster of Germans that made a run for it scatter, and then they're hounded and hunted for the next several weeks. Ultimately, there's another group of Germans that say, look, if we stay here, we're just going to get hunted and hounded till we're killed. And they make another run for it, but they get caught at the Rio Grande and shot up as well. Long and short of it is that there is a bunch of German corpses now laying in a bend of the Nueces that are just left to the elements, and their bones are bleaching under the sun. One of those is the younger brother, Aim Schreiner, who is the younger brother of Charles A. Schreiner, namesake of our university. So what happens to these Germans after this fight? Well, eventually a bunch of them make it out. These are images of guys that helped form the first Texas Cavalry Union in New Orleans. And these guys actually returned to Texas. They served down on the lower Rio Grande Valley. They also fight in Louisiana. And you can learn more about that in a book that we publish here at the Texas Center called Tempest Over Texas. But there is a regiment, the 1st Texas Cavalry, that is composed of a Texas Unionist and others that includes some of these Germans from the hill country. But for others, they have a very difficult choice to make. The Summer of Terror tells them that if they can't get to Mexico, then they had better get into the Confederate Army. And that is certainly what happens with Charles Schreiner. There was some concern, recently in the news about different public figures that had Confederate roots. And I have argued that not all Confederates are equal. And there are quite a few people that jump into the Confederate Army because the other options are very, very stark. Charles Schreiner, for instance, had a wife that was in her 8th month of pregnancy. His younger brother was a single man. That's why he ran for Mexico and he paid the ultimate price. Charlie Schreiner couldn't do it. So now all of a sudden his brother's dead and there's a bloody mood on the land. So what he does is he goes to San Antonio and he joins the 3rd Texas Infantry, and specifically the company where his brother Fritz Schreiner is serving. This particular regiment did not do a whole lot in the war. They served in San Antonio, they served in Brownsville, served on the Texas coast, but they were involved in one battle in Arkansas, the Battle of Jenkins Ferry. After the war, the citizens of this region who had lost their sons, their husbands, their relatives, went to that bend in the Nueces and found the bleached bones of their kinsmen and brought them back. And on the first anniversary of that, on the anniversary of that battle, first year after the war, they buried them in a mass grave and put that great monument over their bones that still stands in Comfort. That said, that's the kind of stuff we do at the Texas Center. And when I was asked if I knew something about the Treue der Union monument, I said, "Why, yes, I do." And I know about it because I've studied a lot about anti-Confederate resistance in Texas. But this is a fascinating story, and one that's probably extraordinarily underappreciated in the region. But I think it's a story worth telling. There's bound to be a documentary, a movie in this somewhere. All right, if we can take questions, I'll be happy to take them. If not, I understand that as well. But I'm about to end my screen sharing. Or so I say. All right.
Well, that was certainly very good, Don. Thank you. How are we here at the Kroc Center? Are we hearing this okay? Tammy, you're on mute. Tammy, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear us now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. We did have a question. Can you repeat that, Jimmy?
Yes, since the battle was on the Nueces River, why did they end up putting the monument in Comfort?
All right, so the battle occurs on the banks of the Nueces, but the people that loved the fallen clearly lived in Comfort, lived over in Lukenbach, lived in Fredericksburg, lived in Kerrville. And so that was chosen as kind of a central location where they could inter the dead. Remarkably, that battlefield is still on private property and is uninterpreted and unmarked. So, you know, the only way to really commemorate that battle is actually there at that mass grave.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Dr. Frazier? Yes, Mike.
The people that came to the United States from Europe to escape the troubles there, were they leaders of were they problems in Europe, or were they just trying to escape from the problems in Europe?
Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. Some of them were just trying to get out of the mix. Some of them were, say, college professors who had a particular view of the world. Some of them became leaders in their new homes. Some just tried to lay low and, you know, keep dark, as they would say in the time period, and not get wrapped up. And so these guys are not on the political make in Europe. These are the guys that have been essentially marginalized and didn't see a way forward politically, economically, socially. So they saw the United States as a great beacon of opportunity where they could take their theories and actually employ them without fear of reprisal or being hounded by the authorities. So, and one of the things that drove people out of Europe was a resistance to conscription. You know, they didn't want to be forced into all these royalist armies. And so they said, you know, I'm 23, I can go to Texas and I can become a furniture maker in Texas and have a nice life, or I can stay here and get conscripted into the Prussian army, and who knows what's going to happen to me then. So it's a whole mix of people that come for a variety of reasons.
Has the professor written a book on this, or is there a paper on it?
There's one book on this topic that is called The Battle of the Nueces, and I think, or Death on the Nueces. It's okay, but it is not the single walk-away book I'd hoped it would be. There's a book or several works by a guy named Paul Burrier, who lives in Lakey, who's done a lot of time with the Comfort Heritage Group down there. He's got sources, he's got raw materials for a pretty good book, but the book hadn't been written. So the short answer is no. I mean, the book doesn't exist, at least not to my satisfaction. And I think that there's probably a great opportunity to have that book written. And I'm also fascinated by the Charles Schreiner story in all of this, because he loses one brother at the Nueces and he has to run for it, to go join a cause that he's not particularly in favor of. And so by the time you take little stories like that, you throw in the intrigue, the violence, the anti-Confederate, the pro-Confederate angles, it's a heck of a story that needs to be told, and well told.
Thank you. Do we have anybody on Zoom that has a question for Dr. Frazier?
Yes, I have a question. This is Mark Armstrong. A wonderful program.
Thanks.
How do we get in touch with you?
You can call me. You can email me. Email is probably best. That way I can park it and think about what you're asking. My email address is dsfrazier, so that's DS, Donald Shaw Frazier, at schreiner.edu. And you can go on the Schreiner webpage, you'll find the Texas Center. You can join the mailing list if you want to keep abreast of what all we're doing here, and get invited to things like our upcoming Labatt lecture on Santa Anna, delivered by the longtime historian and curator of the Alamo, Bruce Winders. That's the way to do it. Join the mailing list so we can keep you in the loop on what all we're doing. And that's
all right, to the powers that be, I hope that ends up in the spoke.
Yeah, I can send a little bit of information from our University Relations Department. He's working on a press release today about that particular presentation. So as soon as we've got the details on that, happy to send it to anybody in Rotary that would want to be part of that. It is going to be a Teams or a Zoom type meeting, or maybe a YouTube. So it will be something that you can view pretty easily, I think, from a home base.
Great. Well, we thank you so much, and we've enjoyed every time we've gotten to hear from you, Dr. Frazier. And we thank you for coming to see us again and participating via Zoom. And I want to thank everybody for their patience as we're trying to figure out how we make this work, but it seems like it's done pretty well. So thank you so much. I have some Rotary announcements. First, Stephanie, if you'll unmute, if you can give us a Families of Rotary report.
Yes, condolences to Diane Green and Kim Clarkson. Kim's grandmother and Diane's mother passed away a week ago, and we missed that last week. We're also thinking about Diane as she continues to go through her treatment. And also congratulations to all those that had victory in the election last night.
Yes, thank you. Also, during the mix of all of the COVID, we did miss something that I wanted to share with you. Lydia lost his mother over the last few weeks, and if you can keep the Green family and Lydia and all of our Rotarians that are struggling in your prayers right now, that would be great. We also have something that I can report on Pines for Polio. I told you last week we met our goal, but we not only met our goal, we exceeded our goal. And we netted $11,500. Our goal is $10,000. So thank you all so much. And while we were excited and so pleased and proud and celebrating, I got a message from Deb Winry explaining that within the entire district of the 5840, Rotary 5840 district, our club once again was the lead fundraiser for the district. The next amount was $3,000, and just said that our particular club was the lion's share of our district fundraising. So thank you all so much. In the midst of a pandemic, we can still come together, and I'm just so proud of this club. Also, one of the things in Families in Rotary, I wanted to say myself, please congratulate Tim Kroc, who was named nominee, or the only nominee in the state of Texas for the Time Dealer of the Year Award, which is a national award. He'll find out in January. It's a really big deal, and he's representing a community in the state of Texas. We have our Veterans Breakfast on Friday. That's going to begin at 8 o'clock. Yes, at the Hill Country Veterans Center. This is a special, it's very special. If you've ever gone and you saw the number of veterans that come and they just sit and they visit and they talk about their time, and it's just really neat. So if you get a chance to come or volunteer, and if you're a veteran, please certainly stop by. It will be sit down, but you can take food to go to. There'll be social distancing and mask wearing and gloves and everything individually wrapped. So it's going to be safe, but whatever your comfort level is, if you'd like to participate, we'd like to have you. Also, we have a special announcement from, come on up.
Why, yes, I will.
Everybody needs to see you.
Yes, I will. Especially the ones out in radio land, so that you can join us. Okay, every year, as y'all, this is my favorite year. Every year, we do this fundraising to help people at the Kroc, and I got to suggest to you that maybe with this year's COVID and out of work, maybe this is going to be a more important year than several past ones. But what's really cool is you people always step up, always come through to help these folks in need. So I have put up on the website, and you may remember this from prior years, all you got to do is go to the bulletin that comes out every week and click on the left side where it says bell ringing for, December 5th or 19th or whatever. It'll tell you how to do that when you read the article. But the point is, after this meeting, call your buddy or your friend or whoever you used to do this with, choose a time, hop on, and then we can ring the bell, and it'll be good, and it'll make a difference. So it's important work. I thank you in advance. You always come through, but help us again this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Also, your invoices went out at the beginning of October. If you have paid your invoice, please do so. If you haven't received an invoice, please let us know, because that means we're going to be calling you. So if you haven't gotten one, call us and we'll get it to you. And if you have gotten it, please pay it. For wine, we have red and white wine. We have David Martin. Do you have on your pin? Yay! So this is gone better than I expected. I was a little nervous. I thought it went well. I hope our people and our friends that are here virtually felt a part of our club with us. They are part of our club, but felt like they were with us, because we feel like they're with us because we can see them. Next week, they're going to put another mic, another camera in the corner so that you can also see who's here, and we can all feel a little bit closer. Also, there's a special guest I saw on Zoom. I'd like everybody to say hi to. I'll count 1, 2, 3, and we'll say hi. But Art Bell is online, and we're very excited about that. So let's all say hi to Art Bell.
1, 2, 3.
Hey, Art! Okay, Art, we miss you, and it's so good to see you. I don't know if I missed anything. I don't think that I have.
I missed you.
They just sent an email. Oh, I did forget something. There he is. Hey, Art, we miss you. Everybody's waving, you just can't see it.
They're all waving at you.
So, yes, I did want to say something.
How do you tell them we heard it all?
They know.
We're raising money, we're,
They do?
we're providing food for.
You should really join Rotary.
Our veterans, we're doing all the things we've always done every year. We're very busy level service projects. That's only made possible by fundraising from our Super Bowl event, which Jeff is planning. So we're going to be getting with you to be able to help us for next year's. They'll be starting next week. Jeff will start giving you some updates. So please remember that when he puts the call out, he's going to need everybody's help to make sure that we can have our funding for next year too. Okay, with that, unless anybody has something else, I think that we will call this meeting to order and call this meeting adjourned. If you'll join me in the four-way test. Of the things that we think fair to do,